Hello everyone, and long time no see. Back in March, I published the first part of this airbrush safety guide, concentrating on lacquer and enamel paints. In today's video, as I promised you back then, we'll be busting two of the biggest myths about airbrushing safety. Myth number one, that airbrush-ready water-based paints are totally safe. Myth number two, that Tamiya XF paints are acrylics, and therefore just as safe to spray. If you're a long-time viewer, you know that I don't use water-based acrylic paints very often, but that's not to say that I never do. Here you can see me use, and actually really enjoy, Ammo's Dunkelgelb paint with my trusty Gallery Mobius airbrush. As you can see, I had no difficulty spraying this in spite of the paint being an acrylic. Why in spite of? Well, because acrylic paints, quite frankly, are inherently more prone to dry tip, especially for big projects like this. Why did I use this paint then, if it was more likely to give me trouble? Well, in my original video about this project, which I encourage you to check out, I also detailed my process for chipping, including what I would call microchipping, which was some of the best I've ever done. Now I will say that the chipping was facilitated by the use of this paint, which works extremely well with Ammo's own chipping fluid. By comparison, lacquer paints are so tough that they can be really difficult to chip this way. So, to reiterate, do I use acrylics myself? Yes, but only for specific purposes. Do I believe that acrylics deserve a place in your hobby arsenal? Absolutely. I'm really proud of the finish that I achieved here, and using that water-based paint was a clear success factor. However, it has come to my attention repeatedly that many viewers, and indeed some people in my own Discord, have been spraying acrylic like that water-based paint by Ammo out of the belief that these paints are totally safe to use without the inconvenience and the additional cost of contraptions like a respirator mask or an extractor booth. In other words, I know that there's a belief out there that so long as you stick to acrylics, the process of priming, base coating, and highlighting your models with the airbrush does not require any safety precautions beyond, let's say, making sure that you crack a window open. Mind you, if you're a wargamer, this could easily involve intensive sessions, painting, let's say, multiple tanks, with not but a cardboard box to contain the overspray. So is that box safe enough? I'm sorry guys, but absolutely not. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to try to explain why, if this has been your approach until now, it is time to change before you cause permanent damage to yourself. To begin with, let's have a look at the safety data sheet for the Vallejo Model Air range, which I'm sure many of us have used before. As you can see, this product, and I quote, is not classified as hazardous. However, take a look here. These alcohols are additives which help with paint flow and leveling of the paint. Their concentration I could describe as moderate, between 1 and 2.5%, but these substances are listed as harmful if ingested and also as skin irritants. What does that mean for us? Well, that these are harmless when brushed on, surely, but not something that you want to inhale as a fine mist. More on that later. By the way, this section on personal protection mandates a particle mask. While this is, I think, meant for workplace conditions, and not those of us doing a quick spray session, I think it's worth bearing in mind. Next, let's take a look at Ammo's new Atom range, which explicitly says non-toxic on the label, and which according to their advertising, promises to give you lacquer-like characteristics without the associated toxicity of lacquer paints. Again, does not require a hazard label. Okay, fine, but what exactly does that mean? In section 3.1, we can see that the composition includes an ammonia solution with several hazard warnings and also 2-ethylhexyl acrylate, abbreviated 2-EHA, which is listed officially as moderately hazardous and carries a long list of warnings. On the other hand, it's clear that the concentration levels of either substance, in this case, are really low. So what can we conclude? In my opinion, labeling this product as non-toxic is disingenuous at best. This paint is definitely not at all problematic if you brush it on, which Atom is also expressly designed to do. But remember that airbrushing, by definition, aerosolizes the paint, creating tiny particles which can be absorbed by your lungs. Long-term exposure can still cause you to be sensitized at low concentrations, and some of the warnings that you saw were specific to allergic reactions. Therefore, I would say, if you're a commissioned painter, for example, or someone with a very high painting output, I would bear this in mind. Okay, so far the two paints that we've looked at don't seem that problematic. However, there is one scenario which we have yet to discuss: priming with the airbrush. If you're watching this video, chances are that you moved on from, let's say, spray cans to airbrush priming long ago. In fact, many Warhammer painters will prime their minis with the airbrush and then do most of the painting by brush. So what about acrylic primers? Is it safe to prime a whole army, for example, with just your good old cardboard box? Now, like most of you, I've long appreciated Vallejo Surface Primer. Not because I thought it was harmless, mind you, but because of the fact that it adds a protective layer of polyurethane to your models if you let it cure properly. In fact, I've seen this layer with my own eyes when applying paint stripper, so I know that it's not just marketing. However, now you have in front of you the other side of that coin. There is up to a whopping 10% of that urethane acrylate oligomer in Vallejo primer. Even though this substance is listed only as an eye irritant, that is a very high concentration for something which your lungs may absorb when aerosolized. I don't know about you, but I'd rather not have my lungs coated with that. But let us look at a second primer just in case. A lot of people in my Discord use Ammo one-shot primer, which I've also used in the past myself. Right off the bat, you can see no toxic chemicals are present. However, it lists 3 reportable components: hydrous magnesium silicate, known to mere mortals like me as talc; propylene glycol, which is used in a range of products, from food to drugs to antifreeze; and lastly, we have carbon black, which is actually a pigment used in, surprise surprise, black paint. Now, I've done some research on all 3 substances, and they're not as benign as you might think. But to avoid making this video even longer than it already is, let's just look at section 6 in the SDS entitled Health Hazard Data. Well, just take a look for yourselves, please. Most importantly, what respiratory protection does Ammo, or to be more correct, Badger, recommend for this? Very wisely, a cartridge respirator, not just an N95 mask, for instance. And they also highlight ventilation. Why did I say Badger, you ask? Well, take a look. It's as I've always told folks in my Discord. Ammo one-shot is merely rebranded Badger Stynylrez. But I digress. Let's go back to our original topic. So far, I've mentioned several times that airbrushing creates a fine mist with suspended particles that can be absorbed by your lungs. This here is a post on a railroad modeling forum, which I found to be a good example of what I meant by that. The user explains how, using an air quality monitor, he noticed that there was a spike from 5 micrograms per square meter to 300 the moment that he started airbrushing. And this despite using an extractor booth pretty similar to mine, which is shown in a later post. As he explains, that is 6 times the recommended EU limit for PM 2.5. What is this PM 2.5, do you ask? Well, let's just Google that very quickly, shall we? As you can see, PM2.5 stands for particulate matter of 2.5 micrometers in diameter or less, which can be inhaled and then penetrate into your lungs. Exposure over time can lead to really serious health impacts. Here you can see a post by another concerned hobbyist, this time on the Airbrush subreddit. In his case, the user measured 115 micrograms after 15 minutes, despite using an extractor booth again. To give you an idea of why this is important, the maximum recommended 24-hour average in the European Union is 15 micrograms. So a huge spike like that would not be dangerous if your airbrushing session was really short, assuming that there was no pollution where you live, that is. And if you took pains to air the room immediately, you should be okay. But just think about what that would mean without an extractor or a mask, or over a longer period of time. Again, this is cumulative. The experiences of these two guys echo my own. Now, I bought one of these air quality monitors whenever I started 3D printing, and as I mentioned in my previous video, I always have an air purifier with HEPA and activated carbon filters running whenever I airbrush. Now, both devices measure PM2.5 levels in the air, and I can tell you that they always spike noticeably, that is to say, they go pretty crazy, when airbrushing, regardless of what type of paint I use. But we still don't have a clear conclusion, or do we? Let's examine the facts first, whether we like them or not. Fact number 1, we've all seen that water-based acrylic paints, even those labeled non-toxic, can contain hazardous substances in concentrations that range from low to rather high. Fact number 2, airbrushes are capable of atomizing paint into extremely fine droplets, often on the order of a few microns in diameter. Those at 2.5 microns and smaller can reach deep into alveoli, and you don't want that. Fact number 3, in the long run, inhalation of any dust above safe limits can lead to lung disease. So what conclusions can we draw? First, that although water-based acrylics lack the inherently toxic properties of, say, lacquer thinners, they still require that we take some basic precautions. And what's the absolute minimum that I would recommend? Well, how about you check my previous video on safety measures with lacquers, where I recommended 4 steps plus an optional 5th. And the same goes for acrylics. If you've been paying attention, you will know that I absolutely love Tamiya XF paints. For example, here you can see me base coating this crashed X-Wing model, which I really enjoyed painting with my trademark XF1 and XF19 mix. Now, a lot of people, in particular in the scale model world, refer to these Tamiya paints as acrylic. I mean, after all, the entire XF range is labeled as such, right? In nice big capital letters. This has led many people to mistakenly believe that Tamiya paints are water-based also, when in fact, they're not. While they're not as inherently toxic as the lacquer paints that I reviewed in my previous airbrush safety video, Tamiya paints do pose a significant risk to your health if you spray them without adequate safety gear. You don't believe me? Let me show you. For starters, let us look at their standard thinner, X20A, which is indeed less toxic than lacquer thinner. However, take a look at that. This is quite the collection of hazard warnings, don't you think? Then, if we look at the composition, we can see that it's 35% 1-propanol and 10% propylene glycol methyl ether, or PGME. Given that both substances are far from safe to inhale, and their concentrations, spraying even, say, atom paints thinned with this without protection would be a dangerous proposition. However, Tamiya XF paints are themselves far from being non-toxic, even if we took lots of liberties with, I don't know, either labeling or semantics, as you will presently see. Once again, even a cursory glance at the hazard statements is enough to give one pause. If we look at the composition, things can get pretty scary. Now, the concentration values indicated vary a lot because this applies to entire paint range, not to one color in particular. For example, a black paint will have carbon black, while a white paint, like the one I used earlier in this video, would have titanium dioxide. Both of these are just regular pigments, by the way. You can also see that the paints contain various types of alcohols in varying concentrations. So again, not water-based. The XF range also has Stoddard solvent, which is petroleum-based and is recognized as a carcinogen in Europe. All the substances with an asterisk have an occupational exposure limit, like some of the more hardcore stuff that we saw in the first video in this series. And speaking of carcinogenic stuff, take a look at what is now recognized as such. Your good old friend, titanium dioxide, aka white pigment. And of course, this isn't just about Tamiya paints, so be careful. Now, in terms of conclusions, I think this time the SDS itself makes it very easy for me. Yes, Tamiya paints are technically acrylics, but they are neither water-based nor safe to use without a proper respirator mask and an extractor booth at the very least. So, if you see other YouTubers, as I have, spraying these paints without any protection whatsoever, please do not imitate them. Now, that's it for today's guide, guys. I hope that this has helped dispel a few myths, and most importantly, I really hope that this video helps keep you all safer at the bench. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Before I let you go, I would like to thank my Patreon supporters who make these videos possible, quite literally. Because if I had to rely on YouTube ad revenue, well, let's just say that I'd be base coating with water and sealing my models with wishful thinking. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember, keep it up and weather it out.